The first thing I heard after my husband's funeral wasn't condolences, wasn't sympathy. It was my daughter-in-law's voice, sharp as glass. "You're not on the $85 million trust," she said, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. "So don't start imagining you have a say in anything anymore." She delivered it like she was flicking ash off a cigarette, careless, casual, but meant to burn. I sat there in the living room, still in my black dress from the burial, the faint smell of roses clinging to me from the graveside flowers. My hands rested on the armrest of the old chair my husband and I bought together more than 40 years ago. It was mine, or at least it felt like it was, until my son's wife leaned over and stuck a neon orange sticker to the side of it, right in front of me. "This one's for the movers," she added, as if I were invisible. My son, my only son, didn't say a word. He stood behind her, jaw tight, eyes fixed anywhere but on me. I wanted to believe that maybe he was just too tired, too broken by grief to step in. But the truth was heavy in my chest. He let her speak for him now. Dinner that evening was another reminder. The table, once mine to set, was crowded with their friends and her family. I was given the seat at the very end, next to the doorway, while she sat at the head. When the food came out, I was served last. Cold potatoes, barely a sliver of meat, as if feeding me were an afterthought. Every bite I took tasted of ash. They talked over me, around me, as if I wasn't sitting there. The conversation was all about what they'd do with the trust money, how they'd renovate, how they'd travel. My daughter-in-law laughed and said, "We'll finally make this place livable." She kept it like a museum. Her friends nodded in agreement. My son even smiled. I folded my napkin slowly, pressing it between my fingers so tightly that the veins in my hand showed blue. I said nothing, because if there's one thing I've learned in 70 years, it's that silence cuts deeper than any retort. When the meal ended, I tried to rise from the table, but my chair scraped against the floor. Too loud, too noticeable. My daughter-in-law glanced back with a smirk. "Careful, don't fall. We don't want any accidents before we get you settled somewhere safe." Somewhere safe. I knew what she meant. A nursing home. A corner room where old women are put away when their usefulness is gone. But as I steadied myself, my palm brushed the inside pocket of my handbag, the one I'd kept at my side all day. Inside was an envelope, sealed years ago. The edges were worn, but the paper inside was strong. My husband's handwriting marked the corner. Trust documents. I had not opened it in years, but I knew what was in there. And as much as they wanted me to fade into silence, I had no intention of being erased. Still, I kept my face blank, my lips pressed together. They thought they had won. They thought their cruelty was power. I excused myself from the table, ignoring their chuckles as I walked down the hall. The floorboards creaked the same way they had when I first moved into that house as a young bride. Back then, I thought every creak meant history, roots, permanence. Now it sounded like betrayal echoing through the wood. In my room, a smaller one now, shoved to the back of the house, I sat on the edge of the bed. The neon sticker was already slapped on the headboard, for donation. They thought they could erase me with paper labels. But I had paper too. Paper that mattered. And in time, they would see exactly what silence can do. The next morning, I woke to the sound of voices in the hallway. My daughter-in-law was already directing people around the house. "Put a sticker on that dresser," she said, her tone brisk and commanding. "It's going into storage until we decide what to do with it." I opened the door just enough to see. She was walking from room to room with a pack of neon labels in her hand. Orange for storage, yellow for sell, pink for donate. She wasn't sorting the house. She was gutting it, stripping it piece by piece, while the walls still smelled faintly of funeral flowers. One by one, My life's memories were reduced to tags. The wedding china, pink, donate. The grandfather clock my husband and I bought in our first year of marriage, yellow, sell. Even the quilt my grandmother stitched with her bare hands, her initials still embroidered in one corner, was marked with orange. This one's mine, my daughter-in-law announced, as she slapped a sticker on a carved wooden jewelry box my husband had gifted me on our 15th anniversary. She said it with the same mocking tone she'd used the night before, and the words cut deeper because my son was standing beside her, saying nothing. He used to fight for me. When he was little, if someone teased me at the market for wearing old shoes, he'd puff up his chest and glare at them like a soldier defending his post. Now, he stood silent while his wife picked my life apart, piece by piece. By noon, she had reached the living room. She dragged my favorite armchair, the one where I nursed my son through fevers, where I read him bedtime stories, into the center of the floor and plastered a pink sticker across the back. "Donate," she said. "It smells like mothballs." Her friends laughed. One of them muttered, "You can always buy something new once the trust comes through." I felt something inside me tighten, a knot pulling itself into place. That evening, I found my bedroom had changed again. The larger bed I'd shared with my husband was gone. In its place was a narrow cot, pushed against the wall. My dresser was emptied. My clothes folded into cardboard boxes labelled with my name in black marker, as though I were a guest overstaying her welcome. The words on the box stared back at me. M-O-M, not even my name, just a category. When I confronted her in the hallway, she didn't even flinch. "We're making space," she said, her smile sharp. "Besides, you'll only be here a little longer. It's better to get things ready." Her voice carried the same message every action had spelled out since the funeral. "You don't belong here anymore." That night, as I tried to sleep on the cot, I overheard them laughing in the kitchen. "She thinks she's still important," my daughter-in-law said, her voice low but clear through the thin walls. "But she has nothing. No seat at the table, no claim. Once the trust is ours, she won't even have a say about her own funeral arrangements." My son chuckled in agreement. I turned to the wall, pressing my hand against the wood as though I could stop the sound from seeping through. But it wasn't the words that broke me. It was the absence of his defense. The next morning, the final insult came. My daughter-in-law opened my door without knocking, tossed a pamphlet onto the bed and said, "Look into these. Senior living communities. Some even have game nights." Then she walked out, leaving the pamphlet lying on my blanket like a death sentence. I picked it up slowly, staring at the glossy pictures of smiling old women holding bingo cards, their eyes hollow behind the forced cheer. That's what they saw for me. A corner room in a sterile building, days filled with nothing but waiting. But as I set the pamphlet down, my eyes drifted again to the envelope in my handbag. They thought their stickers, their boxes, their insults would erase me. But the paper I held, the one I had safeguarded for decades, wasn't a sticker. It wasn't a label. It was a signature. And signatures hold power they had clearly forgotten. I wasn't always this quiet. There was a time when my voice carried weight, when every decision in our household began with a conversation across the kitchen table. Back then, we didn't have millions. We had a rented apartment with leaky pipes and a second-hand couch that sagged in the middle. My husband had ideas, though. Big ones. He dreamed of building something. An empire, he called it. And while the world saw him as the ambitious one, the visionary, they never knew the truth. Without me, none of it would have existed. I still remember the night he came home, eyes bright with an idea. He wanted to buy a small piece of land. Nothing special, just a stretch of dirt on the outskirts of town where he believed a new factory could rise. The bank laughed him out of the building when he went for a loan. Too risky, they said. He came home crushed, pacing the floor, muttering that it was over. That was when I reached into the drawer of our nightstand and pulled out the deed to the small property I had inherited from my parents. It wasn't much, but it was enough to use as collateral. "Use mine," I told him. "They'll take it. We'll risk it together." He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "What if it fails?" "Then we start again," I said. "But we'll fail together, not apart." The bank didn't laugh the second time. They approved the loan. And that land? It became the cornerstone of what grew into an $85 million fortune. People forget those things. My son doesn't remember the nights I stayed up sewing clothes for neighbors to earn extra money while his father poured every dime into machinery. He doesn't remember me taking in laundry so we could pay the mortgage when the first quarter nearly bankrupted us. But I remember. I remember every blister, every sleepless night, every meal stretched thin so our boy would never go hungry. And when the business finally found its footing, I was there drafting the first trust documents with our lawyer. My husband and I sat across the polished desk, and I listened carefully as the lawyer explained how to protect assets, how to ensure stability for the future. "Someone needs to be the settlor," the lawyer said, "the one whose authority remains absolute. Without that role, this trust could be manipulated, altered, even dissolved by others." My husband looked at me. I looked back at him. "She should be," he said, pointing to me. "This empire began with her sacrifice. If anyone deserves to hold the foundation, it's her." I didn't protest. I signed where the lawyer pointed. The ink dried quickly on the page, but I didn't realize then how much power that single signature carried. Years passed. The empire grew. The trust swelled. And I tucked those documents away in a sealed envelope, never feeling the need to remind anyone what they contained. My husband and I had an understanding. We were a team, two halves of a whole. But teams fracture when memory fades. My son grew up surrounded by comfort, blind to the struggle that built it. He saw the finished empire, not the scaffolding of sweat and sacrifice underneath. To him, the money was an inheritance, his by right. To his wife, it was a prize to be claimed, a throne to be sat upon. Neither of them knew the ink on those papers still bore my name. Sometimes I wish I had told him when he was younger. Sometimes I think, if he had known, he might have respected me more, listened more. But silence felt like dignity. I didn't want to boast, didn't want to remind the world of my sacrifices. Now, that silence had been mistaken for weakness. But soon, very soon, the truth would resurface. And when it did, the empire my daughter-in-law thought she controlled would shift beneath her feet. Because the settlor wasn't my husband. The settlor was me. The day after my daughter-in-law slid that pamphlet across my bed, I walked to the bank. Not with anger in my stride, anger wastes energy, but with the steadiness of someone who has already decided what must be done. I wore a plain navy coat, one my husband used to tease me for keeping so long. "You'll be buried in that thing," he'd laugh. "Maybe I will," I thought as I buttoned it that morning, "but at least I'll be buried standing tall." The bank's marble lobby smelled of polished wood and faint disinfectant. I approached the counter and quietly asked to see an old acquaintance. Mr. Rosen, a lawyer who had handled the trust documents decades ago. When he appeared, his face softened with recognition. "Mrs. S," he said gently. "I'm so sorry for your loss." I nodded, gripping my handbag tighter. "I need to review some documents," I said. "The original trust, the drafts, everything with my signature." His brows lifted slightly, but he didn't question me. He led me into a quiet office with dark leather chairs. From a secure cabinet, he pulled out a thick folder. its edges yellowed by time. He laid it carefully on the desk in front of me. I opened it with hands that didn't tremble, though my heart pounded. And there it was, page after page of legal language, dense and unyielding, but on the first page, my name. Not just as wife, not just as witness, as settlor and grantor. Mr. Rosen adjusted his glasses. You remember signing these? Yes, I said simply. Then you know, he said, leaning back in his chair, that no decision regarding the trust can be made without your explicit approval. Your son and his wife, well, they may not be aware. They're aware of one thing, I said. They think I'm powerless. His mouth tightened, and for a moment I thought I saw anger on my behalf, but he kept his voice even. Do you want me to represent you? I reached into my bag and placed the sealed envelope on the desk. These are the duplicates I kept. I want them authenticated, and I want every insult, every humiliation they've spoken to me documented. My husband insisted on a behavioral clause, penalties for disrespect. I want those penalties enforced. He nodded slowly. You've been keeping records? Not me, I said. Them. I pulled out my phone. Dozens of voicemails. Screenshots of messages forwarded by distant relatives. Even the pamphlet she tossed at me. Proof, line after line, that I had been belittled, mocked, diminished. My husband always knew people showed their truest selves when they thought no one was watching. That was why he added the clause. Disrespect toward the settlor results in deductions from distribution. Mr. Rosen read aloud from the file. Ironclad. I almost smiled. Almost. We spent hours that day in that quiet office, scanning, signing, preparing. By the time I left, the weight on my shoulders hadn't lifted, but it had shifted. I carried something heavier now. Power. Outside, the sky had turned grey, heavy with the promise of rain. I pulled my coat tighter, the wind tugging at the edges. In the reflection of the bank's glass doors, I saw myself, not the fragile old woman my daughter-in-law imagined, but someone steadier, rooted. At home, their cruelty hadn't paused. Stickers multiplied on my belongings, as though I were already gone. I walked past my son in the hallway, and he barely looked at me. My daughter-in-law, though, couldn't resist. She stopped, held up her phone, and snapped a picture of me sitting in the living room. Gotta document our progress, she said, laughing. I stayed quiet. If only she knew what real documentation looked like. That night, as I lay on the cot in my stripped-down room, I tucked the authenticated copies beneath my pillow. Paper doesn't weep. Paper doesn't betray. Paper holds. And soon, those pages would speak louder than I ever could. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, thick cream paper with the trustee's seal pressed into the flap. My son's wife carried it into the kitchen like it was her personal victory. Trustee meeting, she announced, waving it in the air. Finally, time to make some decisions. I sipped my tea and said nothing. She dropped the envelope on the table in front of me, smirking. Don't worry, you don't have to come, she said. It's not like you're on the trust, but I guess you can sit in the corner if you want to watch how real business is handled. She walked away, humming, as if she had already won. 3 days later, I found myself in the grand conference room of the bank's downtown branch. The walls were panelled in dark mahogany, and long windows overlooked the city. A chandelier glowed above the table, its light catching in the polished surface until it gleamed like still water. Around the table sat my son, his wife, 2 of her brothers, who had suddenly decided they were advisors, and 3 trustees in dark suits. At the head sat Mr. Whitman, the banker tasked with overseeing the trust. His silver hair was combed neatly, his glasses perched low on his nose. Papers were stacked before him, and his expression carried the calm patience of a man used to managing egos. I took a seat near the corner, away from the centre. My daughter-in-law noticed and chuckled, whispering to my son loud enough for me to hear. See? She knows she doesn't belong here. He didn't correct her. The meeting began with Whitman reviewing the trust's assets, real estate, investments, company shares. $85 million, spoken in the measured cadence of numbers that carried no emotion for him, but seemed to pulse with greed for everyone else. My daughter-in-law leaned forward eagerly. We'll want to start renovations on the estate immediately. Modernize everything. Tear down those awful cabinets. And of course, allocate funds for a vacation home. My parents have their eye on Lake Tahoe. Whitman lifted his head slightly. All decisions must be approved by the appropriate parties. Appropriate parties? She repeated, laughing. We're the only ones who matter. Her eyes flicked toward me. Doesn't count. My son cleared his throat, trying to sound authoritative. Yes, my wife is. Right. We'll be moving forward with renovations, liquidating some stocks to fund new ventures, and arranging monthly stipends. There's no reason to delay. He said it so smoothly, so confidently, as though I were a shadow, an afterthought. Whitman held up a hand, halting his speech. Before we continue with any proposals, we must first review the provisions and confirm signatures. My daughter-in-law smirked, folding her hands together. Oh, go ahead. Show her. Maybe it'll finally sink in. Her friends, those brothers of hers, snickered under their breath. The banker slid a thick folder onto the table. He flipped it open with practiced care, adjusting his glasses as his finger traced down the first page. I watched my son lean back in his chair, confidence radiating off him. He thought this was the moment I would be erased in black ink, that my name would appear nowhere, that his wife's words would be proven right in front of me, in front of strangers. But I had sat across that desk with my husband all those years ago. I knew exactly what was in those papers. The tension in the room thickened. My daughter-in-law reached for her phone under the table, already preparing a message, no doubt planning to announce her victory before the meeting even ended. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat. Now, he said, before we proceed, it must be noted that all decisions require the explicit approval of the settlor. The room went silent. My son frowned. His wife tilted her head in confusion. And then Whitman lifted his gaze from the paper and looked directly at me. Mrs., he said, that would be you. The sound of my daughter-in-law's phone clattering onto the table was louder than the chandelier's crystals trembling above us. The words seemed to hang in the air, suspended between the chandelier's light and the polished wood of the table. All decisions require the explicit approval of the settlor. Mrs., that would be you. For a moment, nobody moved. The ticking of the banker's gold wristwatch sounded like a hammer striking steel in the silence. My son blinked at Whitman, his mouth opening, closing, then opening again like a man who had forgotten how to breathe. My mother? He stammered. That's not possible. My father, he created the trust. Everyone knows that. Whitman didn't flinch. He adjusted his glasses and tapped the page with a neat, manicured finger. Your father executed the documents, yes. But the trust settlor, the originator, the one whose approval is indispensable, was, and remains, your mother. Her signature here is definitive. Without her consent, no actions may be taken. My daughter-in-law let out a sharp laugh, brittle and disbelieving. That's ridiculous. She didn't even work. She doesn't know how any of this functions. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I noticed her hand shaking as she reached for the folder. Show me. Show me the page. Whitman turned the folder toward her, sliding it across the table so she could see the first document. There, in neat black ink, was my full name, written with the same steadiness I had carried decades ago when I signed it. The room tilted for her. I could see it in her face, the certainty draining out of her, replaced by a dawning horror. She shoved the folder away, as though the ink itself burned her. This, this must be a mistake. Some clerical error. My husband's name should be there. Whitman shook his head calmly. No mistake. Your father-in-law deliberately chose this arrangement. He insisted that the foundation of the trust remain with his wife. I have the transcripts of our meetings, the original drafts, even his letters on file confirming it. My son's voice broke through, louder now, desperate. Why wouldn't he tell me? Why wouldn't she tell me? I met his eyes for the first time in weeks, because respect should not require reminders. His mouth shut instantly, words dying on his tongue. The brothers-in-law who had tagged along shifted uneasily in their chairs, suddenly less smug. One of them muttered something about technicalities, but even they couldn't meet my gaze. My daughter-in-law leaned forward, her face red. So what? You think this gives you control? You think you can stop us from moving forward with our plans? You're too old to make decisions for yourself, let alone for $85 million. This is absurd. Her words trembled, laced with panic she was trying to disguise as authority. Whitman raised his hand gently. Mrs. Erwell is the settlor. That is not up for debate. Until she approves, nothing moves forward. No renovations, no stipends, no asset liquidations. Every decision must be presented to her. I folded my hands in my lap, my fingers brushing against the soft leather of my bag, where the authenticated documents rested. My silence had been my shield, but now it became my weapon. I've been quiet long enough, I said, my voice low but steady. You've mistaken silence for weakness, but the foundation of this family, this fortune, rests with me. And every insult, every humiliation you've given me will have its consequence. My son's face paled. My daughter-in-law's mouth opened, but no words came out. Whitman closed the folder with finality. The sound echoed like a gavel. We will proceed to review the behavioral clause next, he said. It will directly impact distributions. The panic that flickered across their faces then was worth every night I had endured on that narrow cot. For the first time in weeks, I sat back in my chair, straightened my spine, and allowed myself the smallest of smiles. They thought the meeting would erase me. Instead, it had revealed me. Mr. Whitman reopened the folder, pulling out a thinner set of papers this time. His calm voice carried through the room, unshaken by the tension simmering. At the table, your late father included a behavioral clause, he said. He believed respect for the settlor should be absolute. Any act of humiliation, insult, or mistreatment would result in deductions from the beneficiary's share. The air shifted. My son sat up straighter. His wife froze mid-gesture, and her brothers exchanged confused glances. That's absurd, my daughter-in-law snapped, her voice sharp and brittle. What does that even mean? Families argue. People say things. You can't put a price tag on words. You can, Whitman replied evenly. In this trust, you can. He lifted a page, reading aloud. Any recorded or verified instance of disrespect toward the settlor shall result in a reduction of $1 million from the violator's distribution. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of my son swallowing hard. I reached into my handbag and slid a folder across the table. Inside were the authenticated records Mr. Rosen and I had prepared. Screenshots of text messages, voicemails saved to cloud storage, even a printed transcript of my daughter-in-law's cruel remarks. Whitman opened it, scanning the pages with the efficiency of a man who had done this many times before. Then he began to read. Message from daughter-in-law to a family group chat. She's dead weight. Once the trust is ours, we'll put her in a home. Gasps rippled around the table. My son shifted uncomfortably, colour rising to his face. His wife's lips pressed together so tightly they turned white. Another page. Voicemail from son. Mom doesn't need anything fancy. Just find her a small place out of the way. She'll be fine. She doesn't matter anymore. The words echoed in the conference room, his own voice condemning him. I saw him pale, his hands curling into fists on the table. Whitman turned to another page. Careful. Don't fall. We don't want any accidents before we get you settled somewhere safe. Statement made in presence of witnesses at family dinner, verified by testimony. The banker looked up. His expression remained neutral, but the silence was suffocating. 3 documented insults, that is 3 million deducted. My daughter-in-law slammed her hand on the table. This is insane. You can't take our money over a few harmless comments. She's twisting everything. Whitman raised a brow. These are your words, Mrs. Koyashi. Verifiable, recorded. This is not interpretation, it is evidence. She looked to my son, desperate for backup. He stared at the table, jaw tight, refusing to meet her eyes. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm, but cutting. Respect isn't optional. Your greed made you careless. You thought words meant nothing. But words have weight, and now they'll cost you. Whitman closed the folder with deliberate care. As of this review, $3 million will be deducted from your combined distribution. Further, review of additional evidence may increase that amount. The colour drained from her face. My son finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Fear. Mother, he whispered, you can't mean to go through with this. It's family. I met his gaze steadily. Family doesn't erase me. Family doesn't humiliate me. You chose your path. Now you live with it. The room remained silent, the weight of consequence settling on every shoulder but mine. For the first time since the funeral, I felt taller. Not younger, not stronger, but undeniable. They had mistaken me for fragile. They had mistaken silence for surrender. Now, every word they had thrown like a weapon came back to strike them. And this was only the beginning. The meeting adjourned with no laughter, no victory speeches from my daughter-in-law, no smug nods from her brothers. They filed out of that mahogany room as though the air had grown too heavy to breathe. I didn't move right away. I stayed seated, letting the weight of silence linger, watching my son rub the back of his neck as though searching for words that would not come. Mr. Whitman gathered his papers into a neat stack. Mrs., he said softly, you have full authority. If you'd like to make immediate amendments to residency arrangements or asset allocations, the trustees will honour them. I nodded once. My voice didn't shake when I said, they will vacate the estate within 48 hours. Their keys are to be collected. Their access to any trust cards or accounts is revoked. The pen scratched quickly across his notepad. It will be done. When I finally rose, my daughter-in-law was waiting in the hallway, pacing like a cornered animal. Her face was flushed red, her eyes wide. You can't do this, she hissed. We have a life here. Our friends know this house. This estate. It belongs to us. I met her fury with calm. Number it belonged to your father-in-law, and then to me. You never built it, you never earned it, and you certainly never respected it. Her mouth opened, then closed. Rage without a weapon is just noise. 2 days later, a moving truck pulled into the driveway. I watched from the upstairs window as boxes were carried out. boxes they had filled with my belongings only weeks earlier. Now it was their turn. I walked through the house slowly as they packed. The neon stickers were still plastered across furniture and cabinets, a carnival of greed in every corner. One by one, I peeled them off. The sound of tearing paper was strangely satisfying, like undoing curses. Each sticker went into the trash, a testament to their arrogance crumpled into nothing. My son tried to reason with me once, pulling me aside near the staircase. His face looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that came not from grief, but from defeat. "Mom," he said quietly, "we didn't mean it wasn't supposed to go this far. Melissa she got carried away. Don't take it all from us." I searched his eyes, hoping for a glimmer of the boy who once defended me at the market, the boy who believed I could do no wrong. But all I saw was a man who had chosen silence when it mattered. "You took it from yourself," I said. "Every word you let her speak unchecked. Every laugh you joined in. It was a withdrawal. And now your account is empty." His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he looked small. That evening, when the trucks finally pulled away, the house was quiet. Too quiet. But it wasn't the silence of erasure anymore. It was the silence of reclamation. I walked into the garden, the one place no sticker had reached. In the far corner, the rose bush my husband had planted still clung stubbornly to life. Its leaves were dusted with neglect, petals curling at the edges. I knelt, pressing my hand into the soil, cool and familiar. With the other hand, I tipped a watering can over its roots, the water soaking deep into the earth. "You're home now," I whispered. The moonlight fell across the garden, silvering the air, and for the first time since burying my husband, I felt something that almost resembled peace. They thought they could strip me bare, leave me with nothing but a pamphlet and a cot. Instead, I had stripped them of money, of pride, of the home they thought was theirs. And I wasn't done yet. In the days that followed, I moved through the estate as though rediscovering a home I had once been a guest in. Without their laughter, without their stickers, the walls seemed to breathe again. But power without purpose becomes poison. My husband used to tell me that. So instead of sitting in victory, I began planning what to do with what they thought they had stolen. The first decision came easily. I would honor the sacrifices that built the fortune, not the greed that tried to consume it. I visited Mr. Rosen again, sitting across from him with a small notebook filled with ideas. "A portion of the trust," I told him, "goes to scholarships, not for the wealthy or the privileged, for the children of widows, for the ones who, like me, were told to make do with scraps while others built their dreams." He nodded, jotting it down. "Another portion," I continued, "goes to a foundation for elderly independence. Not nursing homes, not places to lock people away, but programs that let them live with dignity, in their own homes, with their own choices." He smiled at that. "I think your husband would have approved." I allowed myself a small smile in return. He knew me well enough to know this is exactly what I'd do. Word spread quickly, faster than I imagined. The same community that had whispered about my son's success now whispered about his downfall. People stopped me in the market, patting my arm gently, saying they hadn't known how badly I'd been treated. Some looked at me with admiration, others with caution, as if they feared I might hold a mirror to their own betrayals. I didn't need their approval, but I won't deny the warmth of being seen again. Not as a burden, not as a shadow, but as the woman who had built the foundation of everything. One afternoon, I returned to the bank for final signatures. Whitman greeted me with more respect in his eyes than he had shown even during the meeting. "You've handled this with extraordinary composure," he said. "Most would have lashed out." I placed my hand flat on the polished table. "Dignity is the sharpest blade." It cuts deeper than rage ever could. When I left the bank, I passed by my son on the sidewalk. He looked worn, hollow, his suit wrinkled. He opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to beg. But I kept walking. Some bridges are not burned in fire. They crumble in silence. At home, I took down the last of their boxes, emptied of the things they had tried to claim. Inside one, shoved to the bottom, I found the quilt my grandmother had stitched, the one with her initials sewn in careful thread. They had marked it, "Donate." I held it in my arms, pressing my face into the fabric. The smell of cedar lingered faintly. That quilt had warmed my childhood, shielded my son's crib, comforted me through sleepless nights. And they had thought it worthless. I folded it neatly, draping it over the arm of my chair, the chair they once labelled for donation. Now it was exactly where it belonged. The estate is quiet now, not empty, never empty, but filled with the echoes of a history I refuse to let anyone rewrite. On the wall of my study hangs a frame. Inside it rests the first page of the trust documents, my signature bold and unshaken despite the decades. Above it, in smaller glass, I placed one of the neon stickers they had plastered across my furniture. Donate. I framed it not as a reminder of their cruelty, but as proof of their blindness. They thought paper could erase me. But in the end, it was paper, my signature, that erased them. Some evenings, I sit in the garden with a book, the roses blooming again under careful hands. Neighbours pass by and wave. Some whisper. I let them. I know who I am now, and I don't need their approval to exist.